Hello and good evening and welcome to NYC Film Green Office Hours. My name is Shira Gans and I'm the Senior Executive Director of Policy and Programs here at the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, where I also direct our NYC Film Green program. The Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment is the city agency that supports all the creative sectors in New York City. We have a special focus on permitting on-location film production and supporting the whole film and television ecosystem in the city. So Film Green Office Hours is an opportunity to spotlight different folks, both in New York City and across the country, who are doing work to advance sustainable production in film and television. Tonight, I'm extremely excited for our topic of directing sustainably. We have an amazing panel of women who are leading the way in terms of reducing the impact of the productions they direct. And without further ado, I'm going to bring them on to start our discussion about directing sustainably. So everybody, you can unmute yourselves and bring on your cameras. Okay, hi everyone. Hi Kat, hi Jen, hi Valerie. I'm so excited to be having this discussion with you guys. So first, if you guys could introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the kind of directing that you do.
Okay. Hi, my name is Coiro. I am a director and producer. I work in television. I do pilots and I also do feature films and I also do some commercials. So kind of across the board.
Great. Valerie.
Hi, I'm Valerie Weiss, Dr. Valerie Weiss. I was trained as a scientist, which is where my love of being sustainable probably comes from. And I'm a film and television director. I direct features and episodic TV and have some development for original shows that I'm pitching and movies. It's great to be here.
Last but not least, Jen.
Hello. My name is Jennifer Phang. I came from independent film, got into episodic television directing. I've directed 2 independent features and recently directed Descendants: The Rise of Red for Disney Plus, and I was a co-exec producer on that. And I know Valerie from the DGA, but we're both on the DGA Sustainable Futures Committee together.
Thank you guys, you're an impressive lot, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about directing sustainably with us tonight. So I guess maybe I'll start with you, Valerie, because sometimes, we just get right into the technical details, but I think it's interesting, especially in this episode, because it's about directing, to get a little into your personal story. So I kind of loved how you posed that you always wanted to be a director, but you weren't sure if you were going to get there. So instead, what did you decide to do again?
Yeah, so I was very much raised to have a fallback career, and luckily I loved my fallback option, which was molecular biology, biophysics. So when I went to Princeton, I started out acting as a kid and fell in love with biology, and at Princeton I minored in theater and dance, majored in molecular biology, and I got the chance to direct a play, and that was when the light bulb went off. I was like, this is what I should be doing. It uses both sides of my brain, my curiosity about how the world works, how human behavior works. And so I knew I wanted to be a director, but I also knew I had a lot to learn and that my parents would never pay for film school. But when you do a PhD in science, at least they used to pay for you to do your research. And so I also still loved biology, and I really wasn't sure which path I would end up on. So I thought that would be a really great sort of thing for me to do to keep growing intellectually, and on the side, learn filmmaking. So I started a extracurricular film program for graduate students, and that was essentially my film school. And then 2 weeks after I wrapped my first film, I defended my PhD thesis successfully. And then I was pretty sure, having gone head to head with science versus film, that this is what I wanted to do. So moved out to LA, did the AFI directing workshop for women, made some independent films, and got into television.
Yeah, so for everyone who's tuning in case like directing doesn't work out, you could always go get your PhD in molecular biology. So just relax, everybody. There's always a good backup plan. And Kat, you kind of, had that aspiration too, but you were talking about how you sort of worked your way up to where you are now. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I was the opposite. I really wanted to go to the Ivy Leagues and be a lawyer, but my parents said, absolutely not. You have to be an artist. And that's not a joke. So I gave up my lawyerly aspirations and I went to theater school,
Okay.
what my parents really preferred. And I had a dream of being in the Royal Shakespeare Company. I wanted to be a Shakespearean actor. I moved to New York. I started doing off-Broadway theater and quickly realized that to make a living, I would have to go into television. I acted for a few years and I kind of did the New York young actor, all the Law and Orders commercials. I went to LA for pilot season, booked a pilot. And the more I acted, the more I realized I really wanted to direct.
Huh.
And it was interesting because I grew up so far outside of the film industry. I had never seen the model of what a director was until I was acting, and especially not a woman. It just, the only way in I saw was as an actress. And I quickly realized that's not what I wanted to do. And I started writing everything, shorts and comedy sketches and feature films. I ended up making my first independent feature for $100,000. The second one for about the same, the third one. And then I decided I would have to get a real job because I had 3 children. And so I started doing episodic television. From episodic, I went into, I did go into AFI in between all that too. And I went and I learned a lot about the technical side because I knew a lot about storytelling. I knew a lot about actors, but I wanted to know more about the technical side of filmmaking. So I did that. And then after doing a lot of episodic, I started doing pilots. And then I came back to features with my first studio feature in 2022. And I'm about to go do my second studio feature with Universal again right now. Last year I produced and directed the show Matlock with Kathy Bates. And ever since my first studio feature, I have approached every production with sustainability at the forefront of my mind. And when we talk about it, I can kind of go into how that came about.
It's all very impressive. Jen, I think you said you always sort of wanted to be doing this, so this was clear from the beginning, and that's kind of the path you've been on, right?
Yeah, right. From the beginning. I picked up a camera in high school just for a homework assignment, and it was really hard to stop, trying to shoot things. I would, go on little excursions with one of my best friends, and we would, film these like experimental films, on the rooftops of the high school in the middle of the night as an act of rebellion against, I don't know, the jocks. So we had a lot of fun with that, and I love the process so much of, sneaky filmmaking. And then I did some work with, assembling friends. I guess I fell in love with the process of bringing a group of people together and telling them what to do, and then seeing what the results were. And that led to me becoming a media studies major in Pomona College, which didn't have like a traditional film program, but did have a documentary opportunity. And from that documentary space, I ended up, becoming an assistant producer on a documentary about college campus diversity. And then from there, applied to AFI. So I guess we all went to AFI in some form. And I went there when I was like 23 years old. I was getting my MFA, with people like 3 times my age. It was a really important learning experience for me to kind of understand, the machinations of the industry, how things work, how collaboration works, and just how to navigate what like kind of a microcosm of Hollywood. From there, I raised money. I wrote and raised money for my first feature film, Half-Life, and miraculously got that into Sundance. And from there, went to the Sundance Lab with another script. And from there, I actually wrote a different script for my next feature, which played in 2015 and won a jury prize and was bought by Netflix. And that was a really great opportunity to see if I could, it was like the kind of the heyday of television, So I was asked by some of my cohorts at Sundance who wanted to support me in some way, what would you like to do with your career? Would you like to make another independent film or what? And it seemed like television, to Kat's point, was the right way to go. This is
Yeah.
possibly a sustainable career. And so with the help of a village of, wonderful people, reps, a network of organizations, and the help of Fox Television and Warner Brothers and some beautiful executive producers and showrunners, I found a way to break into television. So it was not an easy road, but it happened.
Yeah, it sounds like everybody's path is a little bit circuitous. I love the
Yeah.
idea that someone would be like, you have to be an artist. That's not something you often hear from parents. But so there's so much that goes into directing. It sounds like you guys aren't just directing, you're raising money, you're producing, you're writing, you're doing all these different things. But you're also here because you're really putting a focus on sustainable directing. And so I want to kind of dive into that because I don't think that there's just one thing that makes something sustainable, and it doesn't, and there are different avenues to this. So I guess, Kat, I'll kind of start with you and your approach to it, and sort of what was the first, I know everyone in our conversations has like a lifelong commitment to being an environmentalist, and that's something you've had in your personal lives, but Kat, when you first started directing, what were the things that you kind of got you thinking about it in this context?
Well, you can't be on a set and not see the waste and not feel, especially when you're at the head of it, that you are somehow responsible for this. And you have trucks idling and trailers and dumpsters and food being thrown out. And for many, many years, I felt that I had no power. Even when I started and I was writing, directing, and producing the films, the budgets were so low, and we were try scraping by just to make the days and make something that was cohesive, that the idea, like, it was in the back of my head, but I didn't know how to do it. And then I got into episodic television, where you really don't have a say when you're coming in midstream. Like, when you come into halfway through a season, you're not going to tell them how to organize things. So again, I worked a lot with a feeling of powerlessness. And I kept saying, when I have some power, I'm going to do something about this. And then I did my first studio feature with Universal, and I didn't know how
Tell us what that feature was. Just so
it was called Marry Me, with J-Lo and Owen Wilson, rom-com. And what's amazing is, at the time, I didn't know that there was a sustainable committee at Universal, which there was. I've now come to know them really well. They have an incredible program that's really blossomed in the last few years. It's called the Greener Light Program, and Wicked, Bridget Jones, a lot of films are now working under Universal's Greener Light Program. And I want to say that because my story starts with me being at Universal and not knowing what to do, and not knowing that there were these people that existed that I could reach out to. And so I brought it up to production early on, but nobody was really that interested in making anything sustainable. So I said, what do I control as the director? And what I control is what is on the screen. And so I made a commitment to have everything be on the screen be sustainable. And that means no plastic water bottles. That means representing sustainable water vessels, food containers. When you see Owen Wilson, he comes to a late night recording session and he brings his little like planet box metal thing to bring his snacks in. And it went beyond that, even to the clothing. He repeats clothes. All the clothes we bought for him were sustainable or recycled. And it was just about really avoiding waste on the screen. And I kind of did it as the director, talking to the production designer, the prop master, the actors, very not with any kind of system. And around that time, the Hollywood Reporter had published a story about a not-for-profit called Habits of Waste, and they wanted to launch an initiative called Lights, Camera, Plastic that was essentially what I was doing. So we teamed up. They had the nonprofit and the name. I was doing it in practice. And every production I've done since, which is, from Marry Me, I went and did the pilot of Girls 5 Eva. And then I did the She-Hulk series, and then I did the Spiderwick Chronicles, and then I did Matlock. And all of those followed this idea that on the screen there is no unnecessary waste, and especially no single-use plastic.
Yeah.
And you know, like I said, I learned that Universal has this amazing program. Every studio does. So I would say the first little piece of advice I will give is, if you have a project, find your sustainable team. And then it's not just you in a vacuum. You will have a team there to help you. And the studios are doing amazing things. Sometimes there's a barrier between the creatives and the sustainable. So you as the creative have to ask and say, introduce me to the sustainable team. They are there. And that is what I wish someone had told me, and kind of, you know, my general blanket advice.
I think that's like a great point, because that comes up a lot about people can feel kind of isolated in doing this work, but often there's a tons of resources, either through things like the DGA, which we'll get into a little bit later, or people who are already doing the work for you, so you don't actually have to reinvent the wheel. So I guess, Valerie, I'll turn to you, because Kat kind of took it on screen because she couldn't at that point work sort of behind the camera, it seemed, to get some of the sustainability traction, but you kind of went the other way, right? Like, you have this one specific thing.
Yeah, so my journey started, like I said, I, fell in love with science early. And so to me, there's that natural connection. Like, if we don't take care of our earth, then, we have no place to be. So it always seemed like a no-brainer to me to be sustainable. And then my kids during COVID got really involved in fundraising for the World Wildlife Fund with the virtual 5K. They raised money for that. And then I got really interested in the Panda Paddle, which was paddleboarding and creating a team. And we've raised over $25,000 over the past 4 years. And what's cool is there's 30 people on our team from all over the world. So we've activated all these people to be excited about their environment and be communicating with each other and looking for more and more ways to make the world a better place. So I was doing that in my personal life. And then just prior to that, actually, I did a show called Scandal early in my career. And I remember it was my first TV job. Well, it wasn't my first TV job. I'd done Chicago Med. I've done some other shows, Suits, other shows, but it was pretty early on. And for years, I'd been saying to other directors, TV moves so fast. What are you guys using to compile all your notes, your references, even audio? Like, where do you keep everything in one place? Because I wanted my script to be something I could watch like a movie. I just wanted it. I didn't want to be fumbling around. I know how fast you have to move. And nobody had an answer. I would just, I asked so many veteran directors, and they were just like, my paper script or Post-its, and they have pockets. And I was like, that's not really what I'm looking for. And so then when I did Scandal, Tom Verica was the producing director, and that whole cast used this program I'd never heard of called Scriptation, and used it on an iPad. And it's amazing because you not only can annotate your script any way you want with notes, drawings, you can add pages, put in your storyboards. But every time you get a new draft, you can update that draft in 10 seconds. And when you work on a Shondaland show, for instance, there's a lot of drafts. And so every day you're needing to change, take your notes from one script to another. And that could take an hour's worth of time every night to do that. So anyway, I was like, this is what I've been looking for. You can even put audio in there. So I can record a song that I want to play back for my actors, or my dolly grip, so he knows how fast to move the dolly on this cue and whatnot. So it was amazing because not only did it do all that, but it made there be no need for paper on set or in my life, because you can also put your schedules in there. You can put anything that's a PDF into this program, and you can tab very easily. You can turn to a page in seconds because you can bookmark. Anyway, I've taught a lot of webinars on this. So
are there actually any links to web? Are those available publicly? I know you said you did those.
They're on the scriptation.com page. And then maybe when someone else is talking, I'll find some.
Okay, yeah, we can distribute them. And it's funny
Yeah.
because, I don't know, maybe 4 Film Green office hours ago, we had one focused on getting to zero about waste reduction strategies. And we have the founder of Scriptation on, and he had some,
Steve.
yeah, some really great insight into what just even one person switching to Scriptation. And I'm sure there are other, again, I just want to have a caveat that we talk about specific companies, but we're not endorsing one particular company, but there are things that sort of come up. So any kind of platform that allows you to switch from reprinting your scripts or everything can really just save, like, I don't remember the exact number of trees, but it was definitely inspiring.
that a season of a TV show, if you go paper, if you use scriptation, you're saving like 1 million sheets of paper. Like it's insane what the waste is. And I would get really offended because I'd get into the tech scout van or the location scout van, and someone would hand me a paper menu and say, pick your lunch, and here's the one-liner, and here's this, and here's the latest script, and there'd be all this paper, and it would be on the floor it would be obsolete by the end of the scout. And so I was like, why are we not just all having PDFs? So this led to so many things. So I could talk about, so the DGA, people knew that I was really involved with scriptation. And then our co-chairs, Todd Holland, Lydia Pilcher, and Mary Jo Winkler, I think has done
Yes, they've all been guests. Well, not Todd, but
invited me, the president, Leslie Linka Glatter, appointed me to be part of that committee. And we started to talk about how we can have real impact. And I mentioned that whenever I go to a show, I will email them and say, I'm paperless, so please don't bother printing anything. And, then a member named John Scott would say things like, yes, I'm also letting them know that I don't use plastic. I bring a refillable container. And I'd say, I always ask for an electric or hybrid car. And we started to come up with all these things that we were all asking for. And so we created this sheet. It's, there's a link to it at the top of the chat. It's in our pro tips guide. We call it internally the John Scott memo because, he was the first one sending it, even though we were all individually asking for things. And so then we started to build out this amazing resource on the DGA page for people to access all of this. And we can talk more about that later. But in terms of shows, other shows, I went to do Bull, and Earth Angels was there. That's a company that makes a set really sustainable through recycling and other elements, and is basically a consultant for that. And then when I did my movie Mixtape for Netflix, we shot in Vancouver, and Canada is much more sustainably minded country than we are. And so the producer was setting up the boxes for composting after lunch, recycling and whatnot. And to Kat's earlier point, we had our sustainable person from Netflix literally in the production office with us. So she was right there. She had a newsletter every Friday. She would interview cast and crew about their sustainable tips. We had a prize every week for the most sustainable crew member. And we just created this culture, and it was great because there were so many kids on set. It was a family film. And so modeling really good behavior. So
that's cool. So yeah, it sounds like there's a lot in what you said, but there's definitely technology that can help. It sounds about engaging folks. This has come up throughout the series of the idea you said, like a prize, or is there a way to quantify things for crew? So Jen, you came at it from a little bit of a different angle, right? We kind of have one from Kat who's talking about sustainable storytelling, and kind of like hats off, because it sounds like you were doing that before it was the topic that you hear about all the time. And then Valerie's kind of tackling some of the issues on set. And Jen, you talked a little bit about, okay, well, you have all these other organizations kind of behind the scenes who are doing events, but those events weren't sustainable. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience and your attempt to tackle it that way?
Right. Yes, during the strikes, there was an organization called the Union Solidarity Coalition, and it was a bunch of writer-directors who wanted to get behind kind of providing funds and fundraising to kind of help anyone in need during like a drop in work. So the idea was that the task, the Union Solidarity Coalition, was going to raise money for the MPTF, the Motion Picture Television Fund. And, I kind of wandered my way into, helping organize one of the fundraisers, and knowing that the event was going to be a kind of an event that's a fundraiser, but focused on stand-up comedy, and having a lot of people just show up, have snacks, have fun, and possibly like add money to the MPTF fund. But also knowing, that we were also going to open the doors to a ton of below the line crew. I saw this as an opportunity to help normalize this conversation around sustainability on set, a green set, Earth Angel. So with the help of Valerie, we brought in Earth Angel to kind of be one of the sponsors.
What is this Chinese company that you see everywhere? Oh, actually.
Yeah, so it was it was a success. And for me, it was just my first step into kind of saying, okay, how do we, because when you go to Valerie's and Kat's point, yes, when you go abroad, it is quite normal to be a green director, to be a green production. When you're here, and I've been in different states and with different kinds of crew, the culture needs a little bit of a tweak, and you need kind of a top-down reassurance that you're not going to get in trouble for trying to find a way to do something more sustainably. And so for me, the first step was to say, okay, green is a priority to people above the line. Second step now, which is I'm working with the Television Academy peer groups to put on another kind of panel, a kind of a version of this, but live and in person with multiple groups, on screen, off screen, and also a group of experts. And actually, Valerie will be moderating the group of on-set sustainability speakers. But the point there is to say, okay, remember that when we make a production, yes, we're all collaborators, but it is both a top-down and bottom-up kind of culture shift that needs to happen kind of all at once. Because that mentality, the idea that we're kind of all in this together and we need to think creatively and also make it a priority together is something that I'm just kind of, trying to sprinkle in and iterate.
I think that's helpful. And there's a question that was in the chat actually that kind of ties to that. So, you're all talking a little bit about how you have learned to access what is now more commonplace, just to have a sustainability team from the studio, or maybe you have an eco PA company like Earth Angel or some of the others on set. What if there are people on set who want to reach the director? Like, let's say you have a director, either you guys who are sustainably minded, but maybe there's something you're not doing, someone wants to talk to you about, or advice, say if there's a director who isn't sustainable and you're a crew member, like what is your advice? I'll start with Kat, for how somebody could approach you or what you've seen.
I mean, there are barriers between directors and producers and everybody else. That's a reality, and that's kind of why it's become so important for me. And I know that Jennifer and Valerie feel the same. It's so important for us to be the ones saying this, because when we go into the first meeting and we say, this is important to me, when you talk to your production designer, your prop master, your line producer, and we've talked a little about some of these things actually do save money. And when you say to a line producer, hey, there are techniques we can do that are sustainable and that save money, you have everybody's attention. So I can't really speak to the other side because I'm on this side. And I will say, when I was a PA, when I was, even an episodic director, I did not feel comfortable talking about it. And that's why I've made it such a part of the ethos of my sets. But I think that's where that's where the sustainable teams come in if you are working with a studio or a network, because then you have some backing. So if you are not a director or a producer, maybe you can contact the sustainable people and say, here's my issue, can you help me get to the right people? But I can't really speak to being on the other side of it because I was terrified and scared. And even when I was a pilot director and a feature director, I was scared of rocking the boat, upsetting people. That's why I ended up developing Lights, Camera, Plastic. That's why Valerie ended up doing, her scripts and what she could do, because you start to go, okay, how can I control small things that will eventually build into bigger things? And with Lights, Camera, Plastic, I always call it kind of the gateway drug to bigger environmentalism. Once you have that conversation, okay, everything we see on screen is going to be sustainable, then you can start to have the conversation, well, what about off screen? And, it might start with just plastic bottles. And by the end, you might be talking about the generators and the carbon footprint. And it is the entry point and the conversation starter. And what I have found is that people want to talk about this stuff. People want to help the environment. They feel that the problems are so enormous that they are daunted. And if they can't make it perfect, they're not going to do anything. And so for me, it's like, what are the small actionable items that you can say to people, look, you can do this, you can control this. You might not solve everything, but you're going to be able to do something. And that motivates them and excites them. And then you can start talking about the bigger issues.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
That was so great, Kat, and I totally agree. And I think that's why it's so important, Shira, for these panels that we're doing. I mean, when Kat and Jen and I all started out, nobody was talking about sustainability. Like, we felt so shy about it. But the more we have these events, the more Kat does her work, and Jen and I, and we're role models, it makes a big difference. And I notice on set, if I carry my like scriptation water bottle and I'm paperless, people come up to me and they're like, what is that? Can you teach me? And now, like, every show I do, I remember like Star Trek Strange New Worlds or Outer Banks, they're like, can you like teach us in the conference room how to use scriptation? So I will always offer, like, you know, a little seminar to whoever wants to use it on a show I'm working. Or when you show up with your reusable silverware in the lunch line, people see that and they start modeling it. And of course, if you're the director, everyone wants to please you. They really want to make you happy. So if you
That
just
must be nice.
yeah, if you really, I mean, not everybody and not always, but
I'm saying it's a cakewalk.
it's really about walking the walk, talking the talk, and you really can sort of change people's behavior that way.
And I
So I
think
have a question.
if you can do it also without shaming, without blaming,
Yes,
like
yes, just
understanding
doing
how
your
hard this task is, and that, you know, I will talk about it till the cows come home. I always bring my vessels. I, you know, try to get everything on screen, but I also am not going to shame people if they're not. To me, it's about opening the conversation up.
Yeah.
And you know what, Valerie, when you talk about coming into the Scout Dan and getting the printed paper, it's like you get binders, big plastic binders with all the locations that you're going to, and that is just habit, and it's people doing their jobs and doing their jobs well,
and they're proud of it. They're like, look what I made for you, and it's nice. But you just need to re-educate people.
So you're kind of, you know, you're changing these patterns that have been in place since before digital existed and before these were conversations. And so it's really important that you understand that some people have not grown up like this. This isn't something that they've been thinking about. And so just doing it gently and kindly, I think, is also really important, and not lecturing.
And to that end, a question. So if you're using scriptation, or you're requiring, like, you have your, you know, like we all have our reusable water bottle. I always have this like nightmare that I'm not going to have it and I'm going to take a sip out of like a plastic cup on one of these things. So do you have rules? Like, if someone's like, hey, I don't feel comfortable with scriptation, I want to have like a printed script, is that cool? Or if somebody feels the need to have, like,
Valerie and I have this conversation all the time, because I use
shaming her.
Like, I don't print a million scripts, but on set I need that paper and I need to write out my script. So again, like the imperfect environmentalist.
Yeah.
Oh, I love
Exactly.
that.
But I think, you know, again, it's of course, what was really the upside of COVID actually is so many productions just did away with paper because nobody wanted to touch things because they thought they could transmit the virus that way. So a lot of shows I've been on don't even have, they have a handful of paper sides or call sheets that most people, they just have them for the people who really can't get rid of them. But most of the shows I do, and it also saves them so much money. Like, you don't need that copy machine. You don't need that person making copies all the time. People can be doing other things with their time. But the other thing I think is important is being curious. Like, I've worked with a line producer several times, and you know, she said to me, look, I respect that you're paperless, but going paperless actually takes me 4 times as long, because I need, on paper, I can cross-check everything and we can work together when I'm doing payroll or whatever it is she's referencing. But when it's digital, I don't have all that information at the ready. And that's something I wouldn't know. And so it's really about departments talking to each other and saying, what do we want to accomplish? What software would do that? How do we make this shift happen?
Right. And actually, Jen, maybe you could talk about, because when we were talking before, you made a really good point about, one, there are constraints when you're a guest director, but something that actually hasn't come up that I loved about, like, your view of sustainability being a little, taking a wider lens. I'll use a metaphor.
Oh, you mean the people part of
Yes,
it?
the people.
Yes, okay. Right. The wider lens, indeed. I was basically saying that, you know, I find myself, I think I'm in the minority when I talk about sustainability. I may not be, but sustainability isn't just, you know, what we have in our hands, the paper waste, the water waste. It is also the whole point is it is to kind of protect people, more people. And so I think of, there during the whole strike or the lead up to the strikes and negotiations, there's a lot of discussion about work hours and, I kind of apply the word sustainability, the sustainability of our crew. And I think there's a way for that to be good because it is kind of like the boat idea, this idea that while we're being really mindful of not only the planet we live in, we're also being mindful of the people who live on that planet. And there is these terms out there like climate justice and whatnot, and those terms just kind of speak to the fact that people who are more vulnerable, who make less money, who have to work longer hours for less money, are more vulnerable to pollution, to climate change in general. So
Right.
yeah,
And
that's something I
you
was.
were also saying like you try to be really organized, right? So that you're not running over and to keep in mind.
Right. So yes, I mean, there is that example, and I think Kat and I were talking about it earlier. Just the idea of, if for example you're getting pressure from the studio to find a way not to rent yet another stage to build another set. What we did on one of our projects was, do this crazy thing where we built a set within a set so that we wouldn't have to take up a larger footprint, but then had to be really, really mindful about how the calendar would be placed. And it would, in a way, it put me in a situation where I had to kind of be extremely well prepared with my schedule, my shot list, and know almost all the backup plans if someone didn't show up at work for that week for any reason, or if someone was under the weather because of COVID. So just having a little bit of adaptability as a producer, as a director, when you're kind of looking to sustainability all around as a holistic
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I've heard that I've liked that you guys have talked about is approaching it in a way that's like kind and accessible, being curious about people. And in a previous life, before this role, I used to do food policy for an elected official in New York. And sometimes we would get into these conversations about like food systems and sustainable, how animals were raised, all these things. And then it would be like, and then someone would propose a farm bill to make sure that farm workers get overtime. And people were like, oh no, like our steak, our grass-fed steak is going to be too expensive then. And it was kind of like, well, the sustainability frame has to be wide enough to talk about people who are involved. So if you have a super green set, but you're making it in a way that it's burning people out because it's 4 extra hours of them to work, or they're super stressed out because they are under pressure and they don't know how to use this new piece of technology. I think that's an important thing to talk about, that it's not one thing or the other. You have to kind of balance this it's a human industry, right? Telling human stories, and that if it's going to make it really stressful to be at work or it's going to quadruple someone's workload, it's probably not a sustainable solution, at least not now, but you could kind of work towards that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, Kat, you talked about how you kind of start in the writer's room. And so I was curious about how that works, the response to writers and that creative process. And
Great. Well, I'm going to drop a link for the nonprofit that I am on the board and that I work with, Habits of Waste, just so you guys can
make sure it's to everyone.
Just to everyone. Okay, so and take a little step back. We talk a lot at Habits of Waste about lights, camera, plastic as being akin to removing smoking from the screens. When every show had people smoking was very prevalent in the culture. As soon as there were bans on smoking, it did change the choices that people made. There's other things like, Cheers helped popularize designated drivers. Will and Grace helped bring same-sex relationships into the mainstream. Roma inspired policy to protect workers' rights in Mexico. What we are doing with Lights, Camera, Plastic is helping people to make more sustainable choices through our messaging and our media. And, if you go back and you watch Marry Me, you'll see like J-Lo has a blinged out Swell bottle. All the kids in school have Planet boxes and Swell bottles. And, you hope that people watch it and enjoy the, fun escapism of the movie, but also maybe stop to think next time they grab a plastic bottle. That is my hope. And again, it's kind of putting the spinach into the brownie. It's not that the movie is about that. But that's where I kind of started doing this. And as I've gone on to my next projects, I have started at the very outset with the writers. I remember on the Spiderwick Chronicles, you know, there was a scene where this real estate agent handed out plastic bottles with his face on it. It was really funny, you know, and it was obnoxious. And I said to our amazing showrunner, I said, look, this scene, I don't want to take away from what you've written, but it really is hard for me to do a scene where we're handing out plastic water bottles, even though the joke is that he's kind of a jerk and he's put his face on these water bottles. I said, so I don't want to mess with your story, but if you can come back to me with 10 alternatives and we can look at them together and decide if it makes it better or worse, I would just love for you to do that, to think of that. And he came back with 10 ideas, and one of them was a map, and it ended up being this really cool kind of callback to the whole story, and we lost the plastic water bottles, and it actually enhanced the story. And so when I start with the writers, that's where I start. I say, look, I'm never going to take away something that is going to mess with your story, but 9 times out of 10 you can come up with something creative that is sustainable and usually better. And you know, in all my work, you'll see Kathy Bates has a butterscotch candy. It's wrapped in plastic. It's such an essential part of the story. We didn't change it. But everything else in that law firm is sustainable. And when they're drinking from glass. And so again, I go back to the imperfection. It's like, we're not trying to be perfect. We're trying to make a huge difference.
Right. So someone put in the...
Jump in real quick.
Yeah, please.
There were some, we were talking a little bit about, imperfection and non-shaming and kind of curiosity and warmth. And one of, I want to kind of bring it also to normalization. There is a certain way where as leaders, we just kind of act as if it's normal to be sustainable. And that can trickle down or just come from, I mean, this actually speaks to the question of how are we approached by people who are below the line. It's, if I see a PA separating garbage, and I'm a non-sustainable director or I'm not a green director, I might look at them funny for a second there, but if 2 PAs are doing it together, I'll go, oh, that's the culture. Okay, sure, whatever. That's what we do on this production. Or it's on the call sheet. We're a green production. Okay, fine. You know, it's just about the volume of people kind of making it normal. So that's something I highly encourage for people who are hoping for the directors to be more green.
For sure. So one thing that's coming up in some of the chat questions is kind of somebody, I think someone's text message sounds are, I'm hearing them go, but so you guys talked about your Scott letter, is that his name? I don't want to.
Yeah.
Scott letter. Like, so one, are you able to, you could say, hey, I want an EV, I'm a green director, but can you say things like, hey, I only want BESS, battery energy storage systems, the battery generators, like, can you say that? What's been your traction? So I'll start with that question.
So I can speak to our available resources, and maybe Kat or even Jen can speak to instituting them as, you know, producing director or producer on a show. So in the John Scott letter, I put a link to it. I'm not up to date. I haven't looked at the latest to see what it's included, but this is meant to be modified by, you know, our members. So they can add things. They could also say, you know, and for instance, in our, you know, concept meeting, I love to talk about how we can recycle sets. You know, you can use it to set the table for when you're getting there. And on our DGA website, I also posted the link to this. It's broken down so beautifully. We've got a section for directors, production, and storytelling, what we can do on screen. Like when we're location scouting, choose a house that has solar panels. It may have nothing to do with the story, but if it doesn't hurt the story and it's incidental, you are unconsciously influencing an audience, or having an electric car on screen, or an electric stove instead of a gas stove. Like all of these things impact the consciousness of audience. But we also have a production section, and that's where, and we have one for UPMs, for ADs. It's broken down by the different categories of members because they all plug into production in different ways. And so that's where you can have more specific information, like you're talking about batteries or diesel, or how we want to navigate, reusing costumes, or,
Right.
whatnot. So all that information is living on our website.
And so maybe you could talk a little bit about, we did one a while back on sustainable sets, which I thought was super interesting. And one of the challenges was this idea around IP of sets, and people didn't want to like reuse sets, or, it just didn't resonate with the artistic vision sometimes for the artistic director. So can you guys talk about, since you're in a pretty, like a position of power, are there things that you find are now more normal, like as opposed to 6 years ago when this wasn't as part of the studio viewpoint? But are there things that are still, you get pushback on, that you think are big contributors to your footprint? And do you have strategies for how to overcome that? Or an example of when you were like, actually, no, I'm going to reuse this set?
I haven't found pushback. I have found the opposite. I have found excitement and like eye-opening. And we actually reused a standing set on the pilot of Matlock. And our production designer, he's a genius, and he had actually built the set for another show, and he was like, what do you think? And it did take some readjusting of the original vision, but it actually ended up being amazing, and we saved so much money. And I'll tell you something, like, if you can do anything that saves money, you will start to be able to have the bigger conversations. Because I know everyone goes to the idling trucks and the carbon output and the electrical generation, and we're all flying in jets to go to these locations. That's where they go. And it's like, it has to start small, and it has to start with changing people's mindsets of like, oh, I can save money if I recycle a set. Well, what else could I save money? And if we kind of invest in the bigger things, maybe we can save money, because at the end of the day, this is a business and there is a bottom line, and people are working really hard to kind of come in under budget. And so I find the smaller things that I kind of focus on really do help open the doors to those bigger conversations, which is where we want to go. But that can be daunting if you're looking at, changing the trucks.
Yeah.
But once people start to see, with water, it's such a simple thing with plastic water bottles. Like, if you're not buying 1 million of those and people have their refillable bottles, you do save money. Now, you have to have the infrastructure, and that goes back to the shaming too. You can't say to everyone, you have to refill your bottles if there are no good water fillers on the studios, and they don't have an assistant to go and get it for them. Like, so it's being conscious of what infrastructures exist. And I worked at Trilith Studios in Atlanta, and I had a meeting with the guy who owns them, and he said, what could we do better? And I said, put in water fillers, and then everyone on that stage can bring a water bottle. We can give it as a gift, at the top of the show, and you will save money.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about last time, and sort of energy sources that as a city, it's like, well, do we have the EV charging infrastructure? And so then what happens if we don't, and people have to use diesel generators sometimes to charge the battery generators and things like that. And it's not one or the other. The one thing I will point out, not to be a shamer, is that actually in New York City, one of the great things about filming here is we have a whole regulatory framework. Like, you're not allowed to idle. And also, I think a lesser known fact is that we actually have a regulation, and this was a Bloomberg era regulation, that you're not, so in New York City, for those who don't live here, like, residential waste is picked up by the city's Department of Sanitation. If you're a commercial entity, you have to find your own waste hauler. And you are not allowed in New York City to send organics to a landfill, which was sort of like, at the time, talk about normalization, like composting. There wasn't an appetite for citywide composting, which we just have now residentially. But that is actually, I think, a regulatory framework people don't necessarily understand, and they should know. So if their trash hauler says we can't do that, well, they need to be able to do that, because we have a regulatory framework around that. So I think that's another thing, is to kind of get a little savvy about what are the regulatory things. Yeah, Valerie.
Sure, I've wondered, and this is not my expertise, so I'm just throwing out ideas, you know, tax credits play into such a big part of why we shoot where we shoot. And I know we're, you know, campaigning for the California tax credit to be different, to keep more production in California. But, you know, I've thought we should tie these tax credits to how sustainable a production is. Just when you're applying and competing and saying, whatever that application is, what about making part of that how sustainable you plan to be? Because we all know economics drive the biggest change. So, I mean,
Right. And this has come up. I definitely hear about this. I will say that the tax credit's entirely decided in Albany, so that's not our office. But, you know, I think like to the not shaming, I definitely think like the carrot approach, I think the models that have seemed, in my opinion, and this is not the opinion of the mayor's office of media and entertainment, it's my personal opinion, the models that make the most sense are, hey, here's whatever the credit is, and here's an additional percentage points you might get if you can prove you're doing these things. I think, you know, it's so competitive and there's so much, like it's really just states racing against each other, right? To try to have the best production credit to be maybe a deciding factor of where you're going to go. And so I think that's a little bit challenging, and that one, it's like a great opportunity, but also it is so competitive and you're trying to bring as much production to your city or state. And so the more it seems like there's more red tape or there's more requirements to access it. So I think it's like, one, it's hard to pass that stuff. But if you could, it would just have to be very clear messaging of like, hey, we have this great tax credit, and it could be even better for you if you did X, Y, and Z. And by the way, here's the way we can support you in doing that by having the infrastructure, or, you know, so I think those things have to be carefully done, is all I would say, but it would be great.
Well, I mean, I know with the Universal Greener Light program, they are making incentives, and I don't know exactly how it translates financially, but I know as a filmmaker, you know, the first thing I did was go in and look at how we can hit all of these marks and get points and take it all the way through marketing, and it's really exciting. Some other things I think in terms of money saving, you know, donating all the food to a not-for-profit. There's so much untouched food waste, and you know, is there a tax incentive with that? There are there's a lot of interesting things that you can do if you start at the very beginning of the production and talk about these things.
I
We
think
just learned in the chat that Austria has a 5% add-on tax credit for sustainable productions. Okay.
did you say Austria?
Yeah, Austria. That's
Okay.
fun. That someone's tuning in from, well, I don't know if you're tuning in from Austria, but if you are, that's cool. Thanks.
I mean, the whole thing about the food waste and food donation was really interesting, and had a lot to do with, you know, when we were doing Descendants and when I was on another episodic, that was one of the bigger issues, and a producer's response to those queries were that there are rules that make it impossible for us to donate the food because it's unsanitary, and the whole health, you know, the health codes won't allow for it. And when I raised that same argument to some sustainable officers at a specific studio, they were kind of flabbergasted because they'd never heard that before. And so I think there's some either disinformation or old information that still might be proliferating amongst line producers throughout. And it's something worth investigating and continuing to bring up state by state.
We definitely have a lot of great food rescue companies here, and I know that's something, you know, I think it's also in running these, is just making sure that those lists and those resources are kind of researched and available, because it seems like people might have the best intentions, but if you're not starting early on, if you don't understand who the people are to contact to come get that food, and you have a small window, it's not going to happen. And it's not as easy, I think, as people might think, to find who is the organization who's going to be able to take the food maybe at an hour that is not business hours, or that can haul away parts of sets. Someone mentioned something interesting in the chat, and I wonder, and then I'll get to that, if people could talk about, you know, working with craft services around like Meatless Monday, or, you know, without shaming people who might enjoy having animal proteins. Like, has anyone had experience with that?
Can I add to that? I think, part of this is we should work towards not having as much waste by the end of the night. I mean, film sets, and it's wonderful. It's so luxurious that it's very plentiful. There's always food. There's, it's on sets I've been on, it's excellent and it keeps you nourished and going. But is there a way to not have as much waste at the end of the night? Like it's so abundant. Have we looked at, maybe not having as much if we don't need it, or just making sure it's the most efficient process? And then, yeah, lots of productions do like a meatless Monday, or they do less meat, several days that don't have meat. And even at the DGA, we had our DGA awards dinner in February, our annual dinner, decided not to have a red meat option. And we've talked about, for other events, perhaps having more, just doing a total vegan approach to catering in some cases, because that makes
And how does that go over?
Well, we saved money, apparently. We saved
so much money at the DGA Awards. And a couple people complained at the table, but then once they understood why, because there was an announcement, this is why we're doing, they're like, oh, okay. So it's also, goes hand in hand with education.
I mean, I think it also goes back to what, I'm talking about what you put on the screen. I remember one actor who really helped us a lot at the beginning with Lights, Camera, Plastic was Mark Ruffalo. And I was working with him on She-Hulk, and I hadn't talked about it because at that point I was still a little shy. And he came in and checked out Hulk's pantry, and it was full of junk food. And he said, no, kids are going to be watching this. Let's change it to beans and healthy things just to influence them. And I thought, oh, he's in the same world of knowing that what we're doing has a huge impact. And it was a real light bulb moment for me too, is like, if you can get your actors on board with this, it's a game changer. If they are like, oh, cool, we're going to kind of influence the culture. I think that really helps. And when you talk about showcasing plant-rich diets, I know in just like that, the Sex and the City, they did that very consciously. It is part of changing the culture. And again, it doesn't mean you have to be vegan, but maybe you do 8 vegetarian meals a week. We have at Habits of Waste, one of our campaigns is called 8 Meals. And it's about just swapping out 8 meals a week. And it has a huge impact. And so, if we can do it behind the scenes, but also do it on camera when appropriate, I think influencing the culture is really important.
I have a question which you might not be able to answer, but I often hear about someone like Mark Ruffalo or other the talent who come to it with a specific sustainable viewpoint. But have you seen other examples of directors approaching talent who might not care or might be open to caring and saying like, hey, can I sort of engage you to be part of this movement or to use your platform? Like, to think about how someone mentioned like a green writer that sometimes actors can get, or that kind of discourse where you're actually, trying to co-opt is probably not right. Engage.
I mean, our job is to be a psychologist a lot of the times. Why I was so excited when Mark came in is I didn't have to pitch it to him. I could see he already was thinking that way. And you always have to ride a fine line and kind of read people and see, is this going to be something that they're going to embrace, or is it going to annoy them?
Right. Do you have any examples of people embracing it who maybe hadn't thought about it? Or is that an area where you're just like, for the actors, we kind of just let them take the lead on that?
Again, it's talking about it from the beginning, right? It's like doing it, like you said, Valerie, on your movie with the kids. It's like talking about it right at the beginning, and seeing who wants to do it. And there are people who you can talk about it from the beginning all day, and they will carry their plastic water bottle to set, for all 300 days. And
I think it's just walking the walk. I won't really even necessarily say anything about sustainability at first. I'll just have my iPad and people are like, what is that? And they'll want to see, and then actors will, want to try it for the run of show. And something we've talked about, and I know a shout out to one of my favorite ADs, Shakir Hafoud, who's on this call from Prague. We just worked together in Budapest on the NCIS Tony and Ziva spinoff. And, we've talked about at the DGA, when you're doing safety meeting, also mention sustainability. Like, what can we do today? Like, what's a tip for everyone to remember, and give people tips each day, or point out how the set is working sustainably today. This is a recycled set we're on, everybody. Isn't this great? Blah, blah, blah. So again, there's so many ways to message this, and suddenly everybody wants to be the cool kid, the sustainable kid.
I'm just looking at the chat because we're getting to the hour point. I guess before I like to now, I did this the last time and it was cool. It talked about like something everyone was looking forward to, but I guess before we do that, there are a lot of like very specific questions in the Q&A chat, but I wonder if there's kind of a broad, if you had to give advice to our audience, I'll go around and do that and then we can do what we're looking forward to. So I guess Valerie, what is something that you would say to the audience if you had like your top tip?
I'd say most things are not actually a trade-off. They might actually be better. It's just a paradigm shift for you. Like for me, going from paper to being fully electronic was only better. There was zero downside for me. And this idea of being meatless on set, I mean, it is healthier. And it's set life is not the most healthy life. You know, it's many, many hours without exercising and without sleep. So if you start to look at, you know, the pros and cons of things, I think we'll all see that there's a lot more pros than cons, and plus the earth and being able to have it longer really should outweigh all of it.
Yeah. Okay, Jen, how about you? What's your
I guess I'm just riding that normalizing climate visibility train. Just keep talking about it, because part of talking about it in this kind of welcoming and normalizing way is part of changing the culture. And yeah, we like our beautiful earth, we like the animals in it, and we like, hiking. Those are very normal things to like, and we have to do our part to make those things, help those things continue to thrive.
Okay, Kat?
My big piece of advice I gave at the beginning, which is find the infrastructures, find the sustainability people. Here I'm putting the universal one in the chat. And you can see it's very exciting what they're doing. And the change in the last 4 years is huge. And then to Valerie's point, like, I am a big tea drinker. And for years I was like getting the tea in the cup and making the tea and then adding my little fixings, and it was really hard. And then I started getting more sustainable, and I would bring a teapot, like a hotel style teapot, to set, and all day long I would have hot tea just to my liking, and it was in my control. I didn't have to ask anybody for it. It didn't disrupt anything. And it's been a huge conversation point for people, because a lot of people look at environmentalism as inconvenient and a pain in the ass, and you're working a 14-hour day and now you have to do this too. And I will say there are things that are really convenient and will actually make your life easier once you start embracing sustainability.
Love that. I guess, as a panelist myself, I would say my piece of advice in engaging with whatever your film commission is that government, though I think it can often feel like we're just the entity that has all these rules and regulations that you have to manage, we also are responsive. And so I think the more productions come to the film commissions and say, hey, actually, like, we want to film here, but we don't have enough EV chargers, or hey, like, what's up with X, Y, and Z, I think that can be really powerful. And I think also, my background, for example, is not in film production. So there's things that I don't know about. And the only way that I can advocate for particular advancements or changes in our regulatory framework or infrastructure is if people actually flag them for me. And I know that, it's worth it, that there's enough stakeholders who care. For me personally, like, I'm a person in a ecosystem too, in order to fight for those changes. So I think that is something people should remember. Government's supposed to be responsive to you. And so I guess I'll end with, what is something you're each looking forward to? It could be about this, it could really be about anything. It's an open-ended question. I don't know, Valerie.
Now I want to do a webinar with you and ask you all about the government. That's so cool though. Like, it kind of reminds me of my experience with the studio, where like, you don't know these people exist. Yeah. And like you said, you're a human being. Like, there are things that you might not know about, that if everybody keeps coming to the city and going, we really want this, that conversation opens huge doors, I think. And I think that's the big moral. Even just this conversation has inspired in me, is like, go and find everybody who is like-minded, and everyone has their different skills, and you know things that we have no idea about. And if we put our brains together, we can do cool stuff.
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
I'm excited to see more content from kids, from young adults, people who've grown up knowing about this climate issue. I just saw a really fun short about recycling from the AFI directing workshop for women, which I did. And Kat, is that the one you did too?
No,
Jen did that.
But great program.
I was rejected, just
Oh,
FYI.
everybody was many times.
Twice.
And so one of the new graduates, she just made this great film about recycling, and I know recycling is controversial, and it addresses that. It addresses all the problems with recycling, and you know, the theme is one person can't necessarily do it all, but one person can influence a lot of other people, and then if everybody's doing their part, you can have change. And so it's just nice to see that that's a topic of, you know, this year's class. And so looking forward to seeing more great content that, you know, weaves this theme into other genres and whatnot.
Love it. Jen, what are you looking forward to?
Well, I mean, to the point of like climate inclusion or climate visibility on screen, I was just thinking about a kind of a period piece I'm working on, or kind of developing, and it takes place in the 90s. And so I guess what I'm wondering for myself is, how am I going to make climate visible in the 90s in a way that's relevant today? It's just an interesting thought exercise for me, because the 90s was a critical point in climate awareness, and a lot of us missed the boat on it. And that was one of the inflection points in terms of people understanding that there was something they could do to curb climate change.
Not to date myself, but in high school, I had a reusable coffee mug with a carabiner that I would clip to my backpack. So that was in the 90s.
You know what? You're right. People a lot of these. The movie is about a smart person, and so all the smart people and the main character and all the smart people around them might already been on that that train. But also, yeah, I mean, to Kat's point, the coalition building that we're still working on, it's infinite, right? So finding those like-minded people, Valerie and I don't know if Kat's going to be in town, but Valerie and I are going to have this event. We're going to build some allies. Those allies will build more allies, and we know that there's a spirit of people not willing to lay down about this, because we know how important it is to our kids, to our nieces and nephews, to our pets, to the birds that we look at. So I'm excited to just keep working on this.
That's great, and I'm excited for our next Film Green office hours is going to be on carbon calculation, and so I'm kind of like a wonky person, so I'm excited to kind of dig into how folks are actually doing the hard work of doing the carbon calculations and looking at, I hope we're going to get into scope 3 and how do you do that, and kind of just going to keep using this wider lens to understand the impact and start taking responsibility for the whole chain. But I want to thank you guys so much. It's been such a great, fun conversation, and I want to thank everybody who tunes in. The conversations are great because we have great panelists who give their time to this, but also because you guys are engaged in the chat and you give us questions, and it helps make it a dialogue. Not that these people are on, but for the people who've missed it, or we will be recording this, and we do put it on our website, and we will email it out to everybody. So thank you guys so much, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Film Green office hours. Good night, everyone.
I put my Instagram in there if you guys want to follow. Kat did too. Good. We put a lot of sustainable stuff up there.
Oh yeah, and we'll also circulate the chat because there's a lot of good resources.
Yeah, I was going to ask if we can get a copy of that. So good.
Right,
I also put the our not-for-profit too.
So good. So important. Yay.
Yay. Okay, good night, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. That was a great moderation.
Yeah, really good, Shira. Thank you.
Bye.